The law office felt smaller than usual, with so many people crowded around the mahogany conference table. I'd expected a simple will reading, just me, my wife Sarah, and maybe a few distant relatives paying their respects to Grandpa's memory. What I hadn't expected was to see my in-laws, Richard and Margaret Whitman, sitting across from me with their own attorney. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table, but I could see the confusion in her eyes too. Her parents had barely tolerated Grandpa during our 5-year marriage, treating him like an eccentric old farmer who was beneath their social status. They'd made their disapproval of our relationship clear from the beginning, convinced that Sarah had married down when she chose me over the corporate executives they'd preferred. "Thank you all for coming," said Mr. Harrison, Grandpa's longtime attorney. "Before we begin reading Walter's will, I should mention that Richard and Margaret Whitman have requested to be present for reasons that will become clear shortly." Richard leaned forward with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Walter made certain promises to our family that we intend to see honored," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades in corporate boardrooms. I felt my stomach drop. Grandpa had never mentioned making any promises to the Whitmans, and I couldn't imagine what they could possibly be referring to. The 2,000-acre farm had been in our family for 3 generations, and Grandpa had always made it clear that it would pass to me when he died. "What kind of promises?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Margaret spoke up, her voice cold and precise. "Walter understood that Sarah's marriage to you created certain obligations. He acknowledged that our family's support and contributions deserved recognition in his estate planning." Their attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit, placed a folder on the table. "We have documentation of these agreements," she said smoothly. Mr. Harrison looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Let's proceed with the official will reading first, then we'll address any additional claims." Chapter 2. "The will reading begins, Mr." Harrison opened the leather-bound document and began reading in his measured professional tone. The opening paragraphs were standard legal language, but my heart sank as he reached the substantive provisions. "To my grandson, Michael Thompson, I leave my farmhouse, the equipment barn, and 50 acres of farmland surrounding the main buildings, along with all farming equipment and livestock currently on the property." 50 acres. Out of 2,000. I felt the blood drain from my face as the implications hit me. Where was the rest of the farm? The prime agricultural land that generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in annual income. The timber rights that were worth a fortune. Richard and Margaret exchanged satisfied glances across the table while their attorney made notes on a legal pad. Sarah's hand tightened on mine, and I could see she was as shocked as I was. "Mr." Harrison continued reading, but the remaining bequests were small. Personal items, a modest cash gift to the local church, and some farming equipment to neighboring farmers who had helped Grandpa over the years. There was no mention of the remaining 1,050 acres. "That concludes the formal will," Mr. Harrison said, setting down the document. "Now, regarding the additional claims that have been raised," Richard's attorney opened her folder and pulled out several documents. "Walter Thompson entered into a verbal agreement with my clients in 2018, acknowledging that their daughter's marriage to his grandson created a family partnership that entitled them to a substantial share of his estate." She slid copies of what appeared to be financial records across the table. These documents show that Richard and Margaret Whitman provided significant financial support to Walter during his final years, including medical expenses, property maintenance, and operational costs for the farm. I stared at the papers in disbelief. The amounts were substantial, over $200,000 in various payments and expenses over the past 3 years, but I'd never heard anything about my in-laws providing financial support to Grandpa. "This is impossible," I said. "Grandpa never mentioned needing financial help, and he certainly never said anything about owing money to your parents." Chapter 3. The Whitmans Case. Margaret leaned forward with the expression of someone delivering an unpleasant but necessary truth. "Walter was too proud to admit he was struggling financially," she said, "but the medical bills from his cancer treatment were overwhelming, and the farm wasn't generating enough income to cover his expenses. Their attorney presented more documents, bank statements, medical bills, and what appeared to be loan agreements. My client stepped in to help family, expecting nothing in return except Walter's gratitude and the understanding that their generosity would be remembered appropriately. Richard nodded gravely. We didn't want to embarrass Walter by making these arrangements public, but we have witnesses who can testify to our conversations about the farm's future. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of paperwork and legal terminology that I didn't understand. The documents looked official, the amounts were specific, and the Whitman's attorney seemed confident in their case. Walter specifically acknowledged that Sarah's marriage to Michael created a family bond that extended beyond traditional inheritance laws. The attorney continued. He understood that our client's investment in his welfare and the farm's operation entitled them to a significant share of the property. Sarah finally spoke up, her voice shaky. Dad, Mom, I don't understand. You never told me you were helping Grandpa financially, and you never mentioned anything about expecting to inherit part of the farm. Margaret's expression softened slightly when she looked at her daughter. We didn't want to burden you with these details, dear. But now that Walter is gone, we have to protect our interests and ensure that our contributions are properly recognized. Mr. Harrison had been studying the documents with a furrowed brow. These are serious claims, he said carefully. If Walter did indeed enter into agreements with the Whitmans, then the estate would need to honor those obligations. I felt my world collapsing. The farm that had been my inheritance, my future, and my connection to 3 generations of family history was slipping away to people who had never shown anything but disdain for our way of life. Chapter 4. The Evidence Mounts. The Whitman's attorney continued presenting their case with the methodical precision of someone who had prepared thoroughly. She produced bank records showing regular transfers from Richard and Margaret's accounts to various service providers who had worked on Grandpa's property. Here we see payments for roof repairs, medical equipment, prescription medications, and even grocery deliveries during Walter's final months, she explained, pointing to highlighted entries. The total amount exceeds $200,000, all provided without any formal repayment agreement. She then presented what appeared to be witness statements from several people I recognized: the local doctor, a contractor who had done work on the farmhouse, and even the pharmacist from town. All of them apparently confirmed that the Whitmans had been paying for Grandpa's care and expenses. Furthermore, the attorney continued, we have documentation of conversations between Walter and my clients, where he specifically acknowledged that their support created a moral and legal obligation that would be reflected in his estate planning. Richard pulled out his phone and played what sounded like a recorded conversation. The voice was definitely Grandpa's, though he sounded tired and weak. I appreciate everything you and Margaret have done for me, Grandpa's voice said through the phone speaker. I know Sarah married into our family, but you've become family too. I won't forget your kindness when it comes time to settle my affairs. The recording was devastating. In Grandpa's own words, he seemed to be acknowledging some kind of obligation to the Whitmans. I felt sick listening to it, realizing that my inheritance was based on a will that apparently didn't reflect his true intentions. Sarah was crying now, torn between loyalty to me and shock at discovering her parents' secret involvement in Grandpa's life. Why didn't you tell me any of this? She asked them. We were trying to be discreet, Margaret replied. Walter was a proud man who didn't want charity. We framed our help as family support rather than financial assistance. Mr. Harrison looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted. These are compelling documents, he admitted. If Walter did indeed receive this level of support and acknowledged an obligation to recognize it in his estate, then we may need to consider how to honor those commitments. Chapter 5. My World Crumbles. As the Whitmans' attorney laid out their proposed settlement, I felt everything I believed about my future crumbling around me. They weren't just claiming a small portion of the estate. They wanted half of everything, including 1,000 acres of the most valuable farmland. Given the substantial financial support provided and Walter's acknowledgement of our family relationship through Sarah's marriage, their attorney said, we believe a 50-50 split of the remaining estate is appropriate and fair. The numbers were staggering. The land they were claiming was worth over $3 million, not including the mineral rights, timber value, and ongoing agricultural income. They were essentially taking half of a legacy that had been built over 3 generations of my family's work. This is insane, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You people have never shown any interest in farming or this land. You've spent 5 years telling Sarah she married beneath her station, and now you want to claim half of what my family built? Richard's expression hardened. Our personal feelings about your career choices are irrelevant, he said coldly. This is about honoring commitments and recognizing legitimate claims. Walter received substantial benefits from our support, and those benefits created obligations. I looked at Sarah, hoping for support, but she seemed paralyzed by the conflict between her loyalty to me and her shock at discovering her parents' secret involvement with Grandpa. Mr. Harrison was reviewing the documents again, clearly struggling with the legal implications. I have to admit, he said reluctantly, that if these agreements and acknowledgements are legitimate, then the estate may indeed have obligations that weren't reflected in the formal will. So what does that mean? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. It means we may need to modify the distribution of assets to reflect Walter's true intentions, he replied. The will as written may not accurately represent his final wishes regarding the Whitmans' claims. I felt like I was watching my inheritance disappear before my eyes, stolen by people who had never cared about the land or the family history it represented. Chapter 6. The Legal Reality. The Whitmans' attorney began outlining the legal framework for their claim, citing precedents and statutes that seemed to support their position. She spoke about implied contracts, family obligations, and the legal weight of recorded acknowledgements. In cases where substantial financial support is provided with the understanding that it will be recognized in estate planning, courts have consistently ruled that such arrangements create enforceable obligations, she explained. Walter's recorded statements clearly indicate his intention to honor our client's contributions. Mr. Harrison nodded reluctantly. The law does recognize implied contracts and moral obligations in estate matters, he confirmed. If Walter received substantial benefits and acknowledged an obligation to recognize them, then those commitments may supersede the formal will. I felt trapped in a legal nightmare that I didn't understand and couldn't fight. The Whitmans had come prepared with documentation, witnesses, and legal precedents, while I had nothing but my assumption that Grandpa's will represented his true wishes. How is this possible? I asked. Grandpa never mentioned any of this to me. He never said he was struggling financially or that he owed anything to the Whitmans. Margaret's expression was almost sympathetic. Walter was protecting your feelings, she said. He knew how much the farm meant to you, and he didn't want you to worry about his financial problems or feel obligated to help. But he also understood reality, Richard added. The farm wasn't generating enough income to support his medical expenses and maintain the property. Without our help, he would have been forced to sell portions of the land or take out loans that would have compromised your inheritance anyway. Their attorney nodded. In essence, my clients preserved the estate by providing the financial support Walter needed. Their claim isn't about taking something away from Michael. It's about being fairly compensated for their investment in preserving what he's inheriting. The logic was twisted but legally sound. The Whitmans had positioned themselves as saviors who deserved to be rewarded for their generosity, while I was portrayed as an ungrateful beneficiary who didn't understand the true cost of maintaining the inheritance I'd expected. Chapter 7. Sarah's Dilemma. Sarah had been silent for most of the proceedings, but I could see the internal struggle playing out on her face. She was caught between her loyalty to me and her shock at discovering the extent of her parents' involvement in Grandpa's life. Sarah, her mother said gently, we know this is difficult for you, But you have to understand that we were trying to help your grandfather and protect your future with Michael. We never intended for this to become contentious." Richard leaned forward, his voice taking on the persuasive tone he'd perfected in decades of business negotiations. "The farm will still be in the family," he said. "Michael will have his portion, and we'll have ours. We can work together to make it more profitable than it's ever been." I could see Sarah wavering, torn between the evidence of her parents' generosity and her understanding of what the farm meant to me. The Whitmans were presenting their claim as a family partnership rather than a hostile takeover. "But you've never shown any interest in farming," Sarah said to her parents. "You've always looked down on this lifestyle. Why would you want to own farmland?" Margaret smiled. "We don't need to farm the land ourselves, dear. We can lease it to other farmers or even sell our portion if we choose. The point is that Walter acknowledged our contribution and intended for us to be compensated." Their attorney added, "The beauty of this arrangement is that it provides options for everyone. Michael keeps the farmhouse and core property, while Richard and Margaret receive fair compensation for their investment in Walter's welfare." I realized that the Whitmans weren't interested in farming. They were interested in the land's value as an investment. They would probably sell their portion to developers or corporate farming operations, destroying the family legacy that 3 generations had built. "You can't do this," I said desperately. "This land has been in my family for over a century. It's not just an investment, it's our heritage, our history, our way of life." Richard's expression hardened again. "Sentiment doesn't pay medical bills or maintain property," he said coldly. "Walter understood that, even if you don't." Chapter 8. The Final Documents. As the Whitmans' attorney prepared to present what she called the final documentation of their claim, Mr. Harrison held up his hand. "Before we proceed further," he said, "I should mention that Walter left specific instructions about how to handle any disputes regarding his estate. He anticipated that there might be conflicting claims or misunderstandings about his intentions." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope that I hadn't seen before. "Walter gave me this letter with instructions to open it only if there were serious challenges to his will or if family members disputed the distribution of his assets." The Whitmans' attorney looked annoyed by the interruption. "We've presented comprehensive documentation of our client's legitimate claims," she said. "I'm not sure what additional information could change the legal reality of the situation." But Mr. Harrison was already opening the envelope, his expression suggesting that he knew something the rest of us didn't. "Walter was very specific about when this letter should be read," he said. "He told me that if anyone ever claimed to have provided substantial financial support to him or asserted family obligations related to inheritance, I should read this immediately." Richard and Margaret exchanged glances, and for the first time since the meeting began, they looked uncertain. Their attorney leaned forward, clearly concerned about this unexpected development. "What does the letter say?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Harrison unfolded the handwritten pages and began reading. "To whoever is reading this letter, I want to make my true intentions absolutely clear regarding my estate and any claims that may be made against it." The room fell silent as everyone realized that Grandpa had anticipated this exact situation. He had known that someone would challenge his will, and he had prepared for it. "I have been fully aware of every financial transaction related to my care and property maintenance," Mr. Harrison continued reading. "I have kept detailed records of all assistance received and all obligations incurred. More importantly, I want to explain the true nature of these arrangements and my actual intentions regarding my estate." Chapter 9. Grandpa's Truth. Harrison continued reading Grandpa's letter, and with each sentence, the Whitmans' confident expressions began to change to looks of growing concern. "The financial support I received from Richard and Margaret Whitman was not freely given assistance, as they may claim," Grandpa's letter stated. "It was part of a calculated attempt to establish a legal claim to my property through manufactured obligations and recorded conversations taken out of context." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Richard started to object, but Mr. Harrison held up his hand and continued reading. I became aware of their scheme approximately 18 months ago when Margaret accidentally revealed their true intentions during what she thought was a private conversation with Sarah. They believed I was too old and sick to understand what they were doing, but I have been fully alert and have been documenting their activities. My heart began to race as I realized that Grandpa had known about the Whitmans' plan all along. He hadn't been a confused old man being taken advantage of. He'd been playing a much deeper game. The recorded conversation that Richard made was obtained through deception, the letter continued. He told me he was recording family memories for Sarah, not creating evidence for a legal claim. My statements were responses to leading questions designed to sound like acknowledgements of obligation. The Whitmans' attorney was frantically reviewing her documents, clearly realizing that her case was falling apart. Furthermore, Mr. Harrison read, I want to make it clear that I never needed or requested the financial assistance that the Whitmans provided. My medical expenses were fully covered by insurance and my own savings. The property maintenance they paid for was work I had already arranged and budgeted for. Richard's face was turning red with anger and embarrassment. This is ridiculous, he sputtered. We have documentation of every payment we made. Yes, you do, Mr. Harrison said, continuing to read from the letter, and Walter explains that as well. The Whitmans insisted on paying for services and expenses that I had already covered, claiming they wanted to help family. When I tried to refuse or reimburse them, they insisted that their generosity was a gift that required no repayment. I now understand that they were creating a paper trail to support future legal claims. Chapter 10. The Trap Revealed. As Mr. Harrison continued reading, the full scope of Grandpa's counter-strategy became clear. He hadn't just been aware of the Whitman scheme, he had been actively gathering evidence to expose it. I have maintained detailed financial records showing that every expense the Whitmans claimed to have covered was actually paid for through my own resources, the letter revealed. The payments they made were duplicative. They were paying bills that had already been settled, then claiming credit for expenses they didn't actually cover. The Whitmans' attorney was now frantically whispering with her clients, clearly realizing that their carefully constructed case was unraveling. Additionally, Mr. Harrison read, I have recorded conversations of my own, obtained with full legal consent, in which Richard and Margaret discuss their plan to use their daughter's marriage to establish a claim to my property. These recordings will be provided to my attorney along with this letter. Mr. Harrison reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small digital recorder. Walter gave me this device along with the letter, he said. It contains several hours of recorded conversations that he obtained legally through his own home security system. He pressed play, and Richard's voice filled the room, clearly audible and unmistakably discussing their plan to claim part of the farm. The old man is getting weaker, Richard's recorded voice said. If we can establish a pattern of financial dependence and get him to acknowledge our contributions on record, we'll have a strong case for claiming a substantial portion of the estate. Margaret's voice joined the conversation. Sarah will inherit through Michael anyway, so we're really just ensuring that our family gets what we deserve. The farm is worth millions, and we've invested enough in this relationship to earn a return. The recordings were devastating. In their own words, the Whitmans were admitting that their financial support had been a calculated investment designed to create legal claims rather than genuine assistance to a family member. Sarah was staring at her parents in shock and horror. How could you do this, she whispered. How could you manipulate Grandpa and try to steal Michael's inheritance? Chapter 11. The Complete Exposure Mister. Harrison continued playing the recordings, each one more damaging to the Whitmans' case than the last. The conversations revealed a detailed plan that had been in development for over 2 years, with specific strategies for creating documentation and establishing legal claims. We need to be careful about how we frame this, Margaret's voice said in one recording. It has to look like genuine family support, not a business arrangement. Walter is old-fashioned enough to feel obligated if he thinks we're being generous, Richard's voice responded. The key is getting him to acknowledge our contributions in a way that creates legal obligations. If we can record him saying that he owes us or that he intends to remember our help, we'll have grounds for claiming a substantial portion of the estate. Oh. The recordings also revealed that the Whitmans had researched estate law extensively and had consulted with attorneys about how to establish claims against inherited property. Their current attorney had apparently been advising them throughout the process. Your clients have engaged in a deliberate fraud against my client's grandfather, Mr. Harrison said to the Whitmans' attorney. These recordings constitute evidence of conspiracy to defraud an elderly person and make false claims against an estate. The Whitmans' attorney was gathering her papers with obvious haste. We need to review this new information before proceeding, she said. This meeting should be postponed until we can properly respond to these allegations. But Mr. Harrison wasn't finished reading Grandpa's letter. Walter has one more revelation, he said, returning to the handwritten pages. I want Michael and Sarah to know that I never doubted their love or loyalty, he read, but I needed to test the true character of those who claimed to be family. The Whitmans' actions have revealed their true nature, and I hope this experience will help Michael and Sarah understand the difference between genuine family bonds and relationships based on financial calculation. The letter concluded with Grandpa's real intentions for his estate. I leave everything to Michael not just because he is my grandson, but because he has proven through years of genuine care and attention that he understands the true value of family and land. The Whitmans' attempt to claim what they haven't earned only confirms that my decision was correct. Chapter 12. Justice and Consequences. The aftermath of the letter reading was swift and decisive. The Whitmans' attorney withdrew their client's claims immediately, clearly recognizing that the recorded evidence made their position legally untenable and potentially criminal. We'll be filing complaints with the State Bar Association regarding the conduct of opposing counsel, Mr. Harrison informed the room. Knowingly presenting fraudulent claims and participating in a conspiracy to defraud an elderly person are serious ethical violations. Richard and Margaret sat in stunned silence as the full consequences of their exposed scheme began to sink in. They had not only failed to steal my inheritance, they had also destroyed their relationship with Sarah and potentially exposed themselves to criminal charges. I can't believe you would do this to our family, Sarah said to her parents, tears streaming down her face. You tried to steal from the man who welcomed me into his family, and you used me as a tool in your scheme. Margaret tried to reach for her daughter's hand, but Sarah pulled away. We were thinking about your future, she said weakly. We wanted to ensure that you would be financially secure. By lying and cheating, Sarah replied. By manipulating an elderly man and trying to steal his family's legacy. How could you think I would want any part of that? Mr. Harrison completed the formal reading of Grandpa's actual will, which left me the entire 2,000-acre farm, along with all equipment, livestock, and financial assets. The estate was worth over $5 million, making it one of the largest agricultural inheritances in the county's history. But more important than the financial value was the vindication of Grandpa's trust and the exposure of the Whitmans' true character. He had seen through their manipulation and had protected both his legacy and his family from their greed. As the meeting concluded and the Whitmans left with their disgraced attorney, Sarah and I sat in the empty conference room trying to process what had just happened. I'm so sorry, she said, still crying. I had no idea what they were planning. I feel like I should have seen the signs or protected Grandpa somehow. I held her close, understanding that she was as much a victim of her parents' scheme as anyone else. Grandpa knew what he was doing, I told her. He protected all of us, including you. Chapter 13. A New Beginning. 6 months after the will reading, Sarah and I were working together to restore and modernize the farm that was now fully ours. The experience with her parents had been devastating, but it had also strengthened our relationship and clarified our values in ways that might not have happened otherwise. Sarah had cut off contact with her parents after discovering the full extent of their manipulation. "I can't have people in my life who would try to steal from family," she explained. "What they did to Grandpa was unforgivable, and what they tried to do to you was even worse." The farm was thriving under our management. We had implemented sustainable farming practices, diversified our crops, and established direct-to-consumer sales that increased our profit margins significantly. The 2,000 acres that the Whitmans had tried to claim were now generating more income than they ever had under Grandpa's traditional methods. But the most satisfying aspect of our success was knowing that we had earned it through honest work and genuine care for the land. We weren't trying to manipulate anyone or take what didn't belong to us. We were building on the foundation that 3 generations of my family had created through dedication and integrity. The legal consequences for the Whitmans had been severe. Their attorney had been disbarred for knowingly presenting fraudulent claims, and Richard and Margaret had been forced to pay substantial fines for attempted fraud. More importantly, their reputation in the community had been destroyed when the details of their scheme became public. Sarah and I had started our own family, and our children would grow up understanding the importance of honesty, hard work, and genuine relationships. They would inherit not just land and assets, but values that couldn't be stolen or manipulated by those who confused wealth with worth. Every morning when I walked through the fields that were now mine, I thought about Grandpa's wisdom in anticipating the Whitman scheme and his courage in exposing their true nature. He had protected his legacy not just through legal documents, but through his understanding of human character and his commitment to justice. The farm that the Whitmans had tried to steal had become the foundation for a life built on principles they would never understand, that true wealth comes from what you build, not what you take, and that family is defined by love and loyalty, not by financial calculation. The letter that saved my inheritance had done more than protect my financial future. It had revealed the difference between people who earn what they have and people who try to take what others have earned.